My name is Marcus. I'm in 10th grade.
My name's Elyza Green. I'm a senior.
My name is Peter. I'm in 10th grade.
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm a senior.
My name's Andrew. I'm in 11th grade.
My name's Anna Morgan. I'm a senior.
I'm also Anna, and I'm a senior.
If you agree with the statement, keep your camera on. If you disagree with the statement, turn your camera off. I would label the Capitol riot as a domestic terrorist attack.
I would start out by saying that act of domestic terrorism, I believe, is defined as like an act of terrorism that's done by someone with the same citizenship of the person that's like being victimized or like supposed to like be terrorized. So if you're just going by definition, it technically would be since citizens of the same nation are attacking their own nation, so it would be domestic terrorism.
I think it's important to note what they're attacking. Obviously, they're attacking the Capitol, which is one of the biggest symbols of our nation. And the last time the Capitol was breached was by the British during the War of 1812. So I think it says a lot about the attack and who was actually attacking, which is why I agree that it is a domestic terrorist attack.
Yeah, and kind of going off of what Elyza said a little bit, it would be the same as a domestic terrorist attack, in my opinion, if even if it wasn't a federal building, even if it was still a building, just a generic store even, and if people went in and did those acts and terrified those people is what they did, and from my knowledge, there were bombs too that were involved. So, yeah.
I agree that it's a domestic terrorist attack because, like Elyza said, they breached the Capitol building, and they also killed a few people on top of that. So it wasn't just that they breached the building; there was also deaths involved.
All right, so I was going off of I'm a little bit on the fence here because I was originally going off of the idea that domestic terrorism, or just terrorism in general, is purposefully harming a population in order to push a political agenda. And so I looked it up on Britannica, and it says that it's a calculated use of violence to create a climate of fear in a population, and thereby bringing about a political objective, but it doesn't actually say anything about hurting the population itself. The fact that they're breaching a government building, they're laying bombs, they're inciting violence unlawfully. I would consider it domestic terrorism in the idea that it's using violence to push a political agenda, but I wouldn't consider it domestic terrorism in the sense that its main objective was to harm a population in order to push that political agenda.
I somewhat agree with you, Kate. My definition of terrorism is it's a group of people using force or violence to coerce or intimidate the government to go along with their political agenda, which I think is exactly what happened on January 6th. Donald Trump incited this crowd by saying, "Let's march to the Capitol, make our voices heard," and after he was nowhere to be found, they took it into their own hands. And you can even watch, I've watched a lot of news coverage on this from all sources, and you can see the videos from inside the Senate floor and the House floor. Those people are terrified to death, which I think is why I categorize this as domestic terrorism. If it was a peaceful protest outside the Capitol building, which you are very much allowed to do, then it would be protest. But these people have gone into the Capitol building, and like Peter said, they did, 5 people did end up dying from this situation. But they supposedly had plans to kill or harm Senate leaders, which is why I somewhat agree with you.
I think that's another thing too. Like the intentions of the people versus what they actually got done. Does that have any bearing on whether or not it should be considered a terrorist attack?
I think you make a good point with like the intentions versus what was actually done, because I think that their intentions were partially carried out, but I think that they did get stopped to a point.
Going off what Anna and Kate said, I think you do bring up a good point, because there are people who didn't involve themselves with this and they just wanted to have a peaceful protest. And I think that we can set those people aside and categorize that as a peaceful protest because they didn't engage in violence or or breaching the Capitol. But the people who did and who actively tried, who broke into the Capitol, should be categorized as domestic terrorists. And I think it's also important to note who these people are. They are majorly white citizens, which can only speak to what the movement is. Donald Trump has preached to these people that they've stolen the vote, that it's unlegitimate, and I think that them being white does play into not only the response from the Capitol, but their idea that they can do this with no consequence.
I would just like to say that most of these people are currently arrested, and they are mostly facing upward of 17 plus years in prison. So I wouldn't say that it goes unconsequenced. I don't think it's fair to say that it's gone unpunished or that there's bias that was stopping them from being punished. Personally, I don't think it's important to note that they were white, because anybody could have done this. I don't think you should ever just involve anywhere with race where it doesn't really need to be added, because then you're just kind of creating more bias. But I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying. Point.
Well, I think that part of the reason that they did this is because they felt like they could get away with it without any consequences. Not necessarily that there weren't consequences or there weren't ever going to be consequences, but I think that they kind of felt like they were invincible and they weren't going to have to face any consequences for what they did.
Back on the subject of race a little bit, like I remember there was a question that was asked back in one of the presidential debates between Trump and Biden, and I remember it was something about like rising white supremacy groups, and like if Trump would denounce them, and he never really like said he would. He kind of like just avoided the question, and I think that's kind of was like nobody really thought anything of it at the time, but I guess now we can see it as like it could have been kind of a warning as to what happened earlier this month, because like it shows that I guess Trump had previous beliefs or intentions tied into this as well, and it's like not solely based on the election either, like it's tied in with earlier beliefs and stuff.
I understand my First Amendment rights.
My name is Mr. Trucker. I'm part of the Individuals and Societies department, and currently I teach IB Year 1 and IB HOA Year 2. The First Amendment protects freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of petition, and right to assemble. Okay, so the freedom of speech is designed to prevent the government from tyranny. Okay, so essentially, they can't force you to say anything. Okay, it's to kind of create civil liberty, so to speak, or individual rights.
I was just gonna say that the reason that I have a little bit of confusion about the First Amendment rights is because a lot of it is very vague, kind of like I've seen that people have been saying that they that like wearing masks or whatever is against their First Amendment rights because it's against their freedom of expression. But for me, that's not what freedom of expression would mean. And so that's part of it. Like, where do you draw the line on a lot of this stuff? Like, what's expression? What's not expression? You know what I mean?
So, important note to say about the First Amendment is that this protects you from the government, and private companies have their right to do things. So if a private institution asked you, I'll use the mask example, asked you to put on a mask, you have to put on a mask because you are not protected under the First Amendment inside of their building. They are a private institution, which is why onto Trump having his Twitter banned, he is not protected from the First Amendment because that is a private institution that has their own little separate rules that aren't covered under the Constitution.
I think that now that the main way to get out your opinions and voice is through these private companies, personally, I just feel like you have a strict advantage and disadvantage with these private companies, because if you want to say something that's like, nowadays, that's one of your only ways to say it. And so if they can just like shut you down, I feel like even though they're a private company and yes, they're their own entity and they can have their own rules, I feel like it's wrong for them to start silencing people.
I think Andrew has a point, because a lot of things are said through there and we don't really think about it because social media has, even though it's a private company, we kind of consider it in our minds as a public domain since so much is said on there. So really how much they can, I guess, censor what we say is kind of important. It just says freedom, and while you can freely say something, what consequences come after that, it's kind of debatable what gets protected under that amendment.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that part. Like, yeah, you're free to be able to express what you would like, but the consequences that come after that would be your fault. If someone, put out a tweet and then, there was a violent act or disruption of some kind later on caused by that person, then yeah, I think that person should face those consequences in the sense of, banning them from Twitter or, something like that.
I would kind of like to go back to a point that Andrew said that about how which is kind of what Anna Morgan said as well, which is kind of how we view our First Amendment. I think that it does need updating in the way that we see how it is, because this was made in the 1790s. Let's be honest. They did not have much of anything then. So while you do most times have to go through these big entities like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the New York Times, CNN, Fox News, anything like that, you still have the opportunity to create your own company. So if you really didn't like how I'll just keep using Twitter, how Twitter ran their company, you can still make your own. Yes, it will be a hard start, but you still have the opportunity to make your own and to still voice your opinion.
I just add that, making your own, like, you could definitely, everyone has the opportunity to start their own platforms, but at the same time, Twitter and Facebook have access to millions of dollars. If you wanted to voice your own opinion and you were doing it by starting your own platform, you would probably be at a very, very large disadvantage. I don't think you could say that Twitter can do whatever they want because you could just like start your own thing. Like, I understand that that's like kind of how like capitalism works, obviously, but I feel like it's just kind of like evolved to a point where we can't like take it into our own hands anymore as much.
And also, I think it's important to point out that when these companies are censoring people, they're censoring the entire person. And so Like in the case of Donald Trump, he's been banned from everything but the third dimension. And so there was a new platform that just came up. It was like chat room or something. So one of you guys will know it, but it got banned from Google. And so like even the things that will let Donald Trump on are no longer accessible to the general person. And the thing is, like, yes, he is inciting violence, but he's also inciting other things that aren't violence. And so I think that brings up the question of how do you make sure that people are heard for the good ideas that they have, assuming that Donald Trump does have good ideas, and how do you make sure that the violent ideas don't infiltrate the ideas that are available to the public?
I like that, and I think that changes my mind on what I said previously a little bit. I think it's up to the people of the country to voice their own opinion against these companies. The people have the choice whether they want to use these companies or not. And I think when you talk about the First Amendment, that's the government. And I don't think the government should interfere in private companies all that much. I know they do, but I don't think they should. I think it's up to the people of the country to voice their own opinion against what's happening and say that they don't like what's happening. And if they want it to change, then they should take it up with the private company and not the government.
Freedom of speech is important.
Well, I mean, it's like quite obviously important, but it like the first thing that happens in a dictatorship is they silence all opposition. That's how you gain power. So, I mean, the fact that we have free speech, it kind of stops one person from gaining an ultimate power in the government, like a dictatorship. So, I think that's the reason it's most important, because like it's most important for a democratic society. If you don't have a democratic society, then I guess it's not very important. But I'd rather live in a democratic society. I think everyone would, but it's out of control for some unlucky people.
I agree with Andrew, just because, like he said, a lot of the times with dictatorships, they silence the opposition. And when there is freedom of speech, you can see like all points of view, all opinions, and kind of make your own decision about what you think and who do you agree with, and just make your own opinions.
I also agree with you guys, but so the first thing that comes to my mind when you say opposition in this instance, and I'm not saying that you're inferring this, but first thing that comes to my mind is the opposition as Donald Trump and his platform, and I think he does have a right to say what he wants to say, but there comes a point where you have to take into account the consequences of his actions. And if he's inciting violence that is going to hurt people, I think that he should not be allowed to say that, because it's overall, if it's going to hurt people, then I don't think you should be allowed to say that you're going to hurt, or he didn't directly say that, but he inferred it, that you want to hurt a group of people.
Just to respond to that, I'd say I agree with that, but the only issues I have is I feel like it's too easy for a company to draw the line wherever they want. I'm not defending him. Let me start with that. I'm not defending him. But what I would say is, if what he's doing is illegal, if it's illegal to incite violence, then we can clearly draw the line there that it was illegal. He should be banned. But if the government can't find enough reason to legally punish him, then does that mean he was? It's hard to tell what is inciting violence and what led to violence, like direct. It's so like gray. It's such a gray area but even though it's gray, the company can draw a line wherever it wants, even if it's just iffy, you know.
I think that no matter what, it's always going to be gray, just because language is something that is so subjective. When it comes to anything part of government, it's really subjective, how we interpret our First Amendment, or how laws get written. It's all left open to interpretation. And a lot of things about politics and government in general is it's just a word game, and who can trick the other person into believing what they're saying.
Donald Trump is responsible for the Capitol riot.
I think that he was, mostly because he, in the past has, we have touched on this before and it's gotten brought up, he has, led to believe a lot of the people that support his views and share his views that if they, they can get away with certain things, and him, not really, I guess, putting down, a lot of the neo-Nazi and white supremacist organizations. A lot of these people were literally hanging flags, with Trump's name on them on the Capitol building. And, I don't remember if it was a tweet or if it was a video, I don't remember what he said. Basically encouraging, I guess, these people to, go out there and do something about it. But then, he just kind of disappeared.
Yeah, I agree that Donald Trump is responsible for the Capitol riot. Not necessarily the extent to what it went to, like people dying, but he was responsible for planting that seed, that idea in the head of these people. As Anna said, his past, if you look at it, he has clearly radicalized this group of people to do things in his name, and I think that's dangerous. And specifically his speech the day of, he I'm paraphrasing this quote because I don't have it right in front of me, but he basically said, "March to the Capitol, I'll be there with you, and demand things to happen, stop the vote," and things like that. And I think that leads him to be directly responsible for this attack. He, like I said before, he has radicalized this group of people and pushed his personal agenda so far onto them, and that they've all done it in his name.
I agree. I think he is responsible because of what he said almost immediately before. I don't actually know if there was so much time there was in between, but then also because he didn't really try to stop it once it had already started. Like, it took him a really long time for him to put out that video. And even when he did put out that video, he kind of said, I completely agree with what you're doing, but it's time to stop. And then another thing that I heard, and this could be wrong, I don't think I've seen it in multiple places or whatever, but I heard that it wasn't even him that called in the National Guard, and I heard that it was Pence. So that's just another thing where it wasn't even Trump trying to stop it. It was other people that were in power trying to kind of stop what he was already doing.
I think Trump has also polarized the media as far as his alternative facts and his fake news. He's planted this seed of distrust of anyone who doesn't directly support Trump. And I think that's not entirely Trump's fault. I think that there's been a division of this presidency has been the most bipartisan presidency as far as the news sources go, that I've experienced anyway. And so I think that, well, it's not entirely Trump's fault because he doesn't have control over news sources. The fact that he openly denounces anything that questions anything that he does definitely creates a sense of almost like a cult mentality, where he is the ultimate, almost omnipotent source of information. If you have a distrust in any information that you're getting, and you're depending on this one person for it, it's going to be corrupt information no matter who it is that's giving it.
It's not just the Republican right-leaning side that's been radicalized. I think it's both sides, which I'll be honest, I am a liberal. I'm not an extreme leftist. I don't identify with actions that the left has taken, but I think it's important to note that both sides have been radicalized and kind of pushed to think that the other side is just the ultimate wrong. And I think that also contributes to this idea that the only way to get something to happen is to take physical action, and that there's no more talking or anything like that. And I think Trump has also pushed that idea that if you want something to happen, the left isn't going to listen, and that they don't care about what you have to say, that you have to take physical action to make that happen.
And in some respects, I think he's right. I think that I've been a part of several of these different talking groups, all with different people, and I've noticed that most of them are fairly liberal people. And I think the conclusion that I've come to anyway is that I don't think that Trump supporters necessarily feel welcome in this community that we've created, because of the fact that the parties have become so divided that if you support Trump, then you are a laughingstock. I'm sure you guys have noticed that I'm a little bit more right-wing leaning than I think most of you guys are, but I still don't consider myself, I would still consider myself a conservative liberal. I think I myself have been met with opposition on either side of saying that I'm too far right or I'm too far left. And I think that is really damaging to our unity as a whole. If you're supposed to be picking sides, then nobody is actually coming to the middle and actually trying to take both sides and get them to talk to each other.
Honestly, after listening, I don't even think I can disagree anymore. I think everybody in this call definitely is going to respect each other, though, no matter what they think. But what I do think is, I think that the people that are the only people that are in the wrong are the people that are not going to listen to even consider changing their minds. Like, I think we can assume that most of the people who did the Capitol riot weren't going to change their minds. No one's going to change their mind on their political beliefs, because they're just dead set on being 100% one way. And I don't think anyone should be 100% Republican policies, 100% Democratic policies, because I just don't think most people can have like all their opinions in one list and not have them like separated. So I think it's bad that they have the two-party system.
Well, I guess the one thing is that we're kind of, if you look at it from a large group of people, it is very polarizing, but if you look at it at a very small group of people, like what we're doing now, it really isn't all that polarizing, I guess. So what I'm trying to say is it kind of depends on how large of a group of people you're talking about, whether you face that kind of box or not. Because, I mean, right now I don't think we're putting each other into that kind of box, but once you get to a larger scale, like on social media, it's very, you're either with us or against us.
I have learned something today.
Oh God, I've definitely learned something today. I think it's important to keep your interpretation open. And I said before in the call that I did change my mind on things based on what people have said, and I think that's important for everyone to do.
Yeah, definitely what you said, ditto to that. But yeah, so like to name specifics, like the terrorist attack, like I didn't know that they were going after the senator specifically, and I guess that's kind of a no-brainer. I guess I'd have to look into that more, but I was thinking of it more of a symbolic kind of event as opposed to an event that was specifically meant to target and hurt people. And so I'm still not really sure which event it was, so I'll have to look more into that. I think, it kind of opened my eyes to how little I knew about the attack.
And I think that most people, I would say generally, coming from, I guess, this talk, that most people respect that, people have their views and their beliefs and their opinions, but we have ours, but it's still important to respect that, there are differences. Not everyone's going to agree on everything. And, more so the idea that you have to respect that we can't force people to change their minds unless they're open to it.